Thank you for listening to Mormon Sex Info. This episode is an archived episode and is only now becoming publicly available. Mormon Sex Info relies on contributions. To contribute, please visit mormonsex.info. And now, please enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to another co-production between Mormon Sex Info and Mormon Mental Health Podcast. This is Natasha Helfer-Parker, and I'm so excited to have another episode of Mormon Sex in the News, although we're going to deviate a little bit tonight from our normal kind of way that we do this, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. As far as subscriptions go, I just want to point out, I know I've been asking for money, which is not my favorite thing to do, but I need it to keep this program going. And so I just want to let you all know that I'm about a fourth of the way to where I need to be from people who've been listening to my requests. So thank you so much, donors who've started the donation process to mormonmentalhealth.org. You can find the donate button on there. For those of you who are listening to this through Mormon Sex Info and are subscribers, then that's great because you get to listen to this before anybody else does. That's the bonus there. So anyway, thank you for your support. I need a lot more of it. Please keep it coming. Without further ado, let me introduce who's with me tonight. So I've got Kristen Benyon, who is a certified sex therapist in Utah, as well as Shannon Hickman, who is also a certified sex therapist in Utah. All of us are ASECT certified. We make that really an important piece of who we invite to have these shows with us, because lots of people out there call themselves sex therapists and haven't necessarily been through the training of it. And so we just try to be really picky about it because of important things like tonight, for example. So tonight we have another guest. Her name is Camille Agard. Am I saying that right? Your last name?
Agard.
Agard.
Yeah, I go by Camille Bailey Agard.
Camille Bailey Agard. And she reached out to me a few months ago with a piece that she wrote to her son. So this is a, mom of a teenager. And what we're going to do today is, instead of looking at news articles, we're going to look at her piece and we're going to go through it with her. So first of all, we just want to say that we're impressed with her bravery and courage of having 3 sex therapists look at her piece and be willing to dissect it with her. So
I'm so lucky.
We're very, very pleased that you're willing to do that. And we're hoping that this serves as a kind of a role modeling of being open to the concerns that a lot of parents have, being able to listen to some of our perspectives on some of those concerns, and hopefully just having a really rich discussion. But before we go into that, I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to introduce yourselves a little further. So why don't we start with how I just started the introduction. So Kristen, and then Shannon, and then Camille.
Hello. Nice. This is Kristen Benyon. I am a certified sex therapist, as Natasha was saying. My practice is in Orem, Utah, where I work predominantly with LDS clients, mixed faith clients, and those that have kind of transitioned away from the church and are developing some more understanding of their sexuality and how they want to move forward. I'm working toward a PhD in critical sexuality studies, and that keeps me really busy and tired.
I think everybody's tired for different reasons. Yeah. One of you is in law school, one of you in PhD, one of you is nursing a baby. I'm the only one that has no excuse to be tired.
You do not tired too. But hours, Natasha.
All right, Shannon.
Okay, I'm Shannon Hickman. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm also a certified sex therapist. I have a private practice in Murray, Utah called Core Healing Counseling, where I work primarily with couples and also just see a lot of individuals and couples for sex therapy.
Great. And Camille.
All right. I am Camille Bailey Agard. I have 5 children, and later in life have returned to law school. So I'm a 2L at BYU Law, and I'm just so honored to get to be with these 3 women tonight. Like, I can't think of 3 people I need to talk to more than the 3 of you right now for more than one reason. So, yay.
Hooray. All right. And then what are the ages of the kiddos you have?
So my oldest is 19. She is profoundly mentally impaired with a genetic disorder called Angelman syndrome. So she is a handful. And then the 17-year-old is waiting to hear from all the engineering schools. She's a senior in high school. And then I have a 15-year-old son. And then 2 little girls, they just turned 12 and 10.
Okay, so you have 1 male child out of the
Yeah.
whole group.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're going to dive right into your piece. And you started it by saying something that I thought is pretty funny. I think you have a good sense of humor, Camille. So it says,
Okay.
Dear Alex, here are 3 reasons people will tell you not to view porn, which are not true and which will not stop you from wanting to view it. So number 1, you won't go to the celestial kingdom. Number 2, you'll become an instant sex addict. And number 3, you'll become an evil fiend of Satan.
Satan.
You say these and other similar messages contribute to sexual shaming, which will likely harm your self-esteem, give you anxiety, and disrupt your sexual development and self-identity. So right off the bat, you really do a pretty phenomenal job of moving away from some of, I think, the basic rhetoric that sometimes we get at church, which is very fear-based, and the fact that you're concerned about shaming him or doing anything that would create anxiety in that regard seems really forward thinking of you. So how did you even get to that point?
Well, how did I? I guess I've listened to your podcasts and a lot of I get all the Mormon podcasts mixed up. And frankly, I have not listened to them since I started law school, but it's all I did before I started to keep myself sane. I just walked around with earbuds in and listened to every podcast I could. So maybe that exposure got me at least started on the right road.
Kristen and Shannon, what do you think of as you think of, here's a Mormon mom, comes from Mormonism in her background, and right off the bat, she's being kind of fun and sassy about, don't worry about it keeping you from the celestial kingdom, and you're not going to become Satan's minion.
I loved it. That opening part, I was just sitting there going, thumbs up. It kind of right out of the gate kind of nails some, like, what I think we'll be talking about, like some all or nothing kind of language. Like, if you even touch this, you're definitely gonna get bamboozled by the bad things. I don't know, so I loved your, just right out of the gate, like Natasha was saying, how you just went straight for it contributes to sexual shaming, which definitely gets in the way of, like you said, self-esteem, can bring on mood concerns and really disrupt development. I thought that was great.
Thank you. I just thought of another source. I was Relief Society president of our ward about 3 years ago, and I was sort of on this, I just didn't want to do any more themed parties with doilies. Like, I was trying to kind of get at the root of what issues we were facing in our homes, and I would invite guest speakers in. And so we did a class on pornography, and I brought in a guest speaker. I don't think he was as qualified as Natasha or the 2 of you would have been, but it was the best I could find at the time. And so I got exposure to some of these ideas there too.
Okay, great. Shannon, any initial thoughts from you?
I just think that it's great that she even is addressing that it can cause sexual shame, because we kind of know that that's just from what Tina Sellers talks about, that's something that comes out of the purity movement, and also that a lot of people deal with that come from any type of religious background. So the fact that she's addressing that, I think, is great. And I think it's something that parents need to be really careful of as we're raising kids. And I think that's a good topic to kind of touch on tonight.
And I always like it too when the opposite sex parent is willing to talk to the kid, right? So whether it's a dad willing to talk to his daughters or the mom willing to talk to her sons, and we don't just automatically put it on the same sex parent to have that responsibility. So I thought that was great too. All right. So you come up with 18 bullet points, and these are the ones that we're going to dive into. Number 1, you say sex should be one of the most amazing, fun, playful parts of your life, but it won't be if you're sexist. If you have sex before you're ready, you have no idea how to make it a good experience for a young woman. You'll have a good time and she'll walk away, likely having experienced nothing but physical and later emotional pain. Aim higher. Aim for an equal relationship where sex is an expression of love and joy and connection. Only then will you truly know the meaning of heartgasm.
I coined that term. You can thank me for that.
I think it's great. I like it.
All right. So why don't we kind of take each of these bullet points, ladies, and, may point out what some of the concerns are that parents, probably have a right to be concerned about, maybe some of the positives, and then maybe some of the limitations to the point that's being made. What do we hear here that mom is concerned about?
So you want to do concerns first?
Yes.
Or what's good first? Okay.
Yeah, the concern. Like, what do you hear mom being concerned about?
So having sex before you're ready, right? And making sure it's a good experience for a young woman. And I think you're kind of hitting on the pornography doesn't necessarily always show the woman having a lot of pleasure, and that's maybe not the best place to learn about how to please a woman. I think that's what you're trying to say there, right?
Well, I think I had a deadline for this paper at 8:00 in the morning, and I was trying to do it at 7:40. And so I think I kind of lost track of the porn. I think I was speaking it more broadly just to why you should not have sex before you're ready, and sort of as a precursor to the actual discussion of porn. Mm. So I think that's what I was going at there, was just, don't be an idiot. I say that to him a lot. This is a two-way street. I think sometimes in the church, especially, you guys can correct me, but my perception is that there's sort of this weird messaging that men are more sexual than women, which I don't believe at all, but I think that gets perpetuated, and maybe, boys believe it too. So that they're the more sexual being with the higher sexual needs. And if you go into a sexual relationship with that, it probably will be one-sided.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. I think that's something that is kind of a common myth that we probably all three of us see in our office a lot, and help to dispel that the sex is kind of for the man, and that they want it more than a woman. And I don't know about you guys, but in my practice, I would say it's kind of 50-50 with couples. I have a lot of couples that come in that have desire. The man might be the higher desire partner, or the man might be the lower desire partner.
I'm actually surprised to hear that, because I would think if you're mostly serving a Mormon, patient group, that because of that messaging, I would expect there are a lot of women that sort of feel asexual, when maybe, they haven't tapped into their true sexuality just from all the messaging they've received. But that's just my impression.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that, and I don't know what you think, Natasha and Kristen, but something that in my practice that is something that I educate a lot of clients on, because we have men come in that feel a lot of shame around having the lower desire. And it works against them as well, that they're supposed to want sex all the time, be thinking about it all the time, that it's, something they're just going to be really good at doing, that they're going to be able to please their partner, and then doesn't happen because a lot of times in Mormon marriages, they haven't had sex before marriage, right? So they go in and it's not a pleasurable experience. And I think that's the only thing on here that I see, that when it says it should be one of the most amazing, fun, playful parts of your life, I definitely would agree with that. But I think the difficulty with that messaging at times is that it creates this idea that it's supposed to be so easy and natural, and it's going to be the best thing we ever do. And then wedding night comes and it's not a wonderful experience, and it's really hard. And I think we talk about this all the time in a lot of the podcasts, but we need a lot of skills. It's just like with anything else we do in life, takes practice. We need to know how to do it, and we need the tools to be able to do it well. Sorry.
No, good. Kristen, thoughts about this first point?
One of the biggest things that I'm getting out of it is how, and that I really like, is how much you're emphasizing, from what it looks like to me, just sexual contact with another person before you're ready can lead to some real tough stuff that you would like your son to avoid, right? That you'd like for him to be developmentally ready to begin engaging in that part of his life with another person. Is that what you're getting at there?
Yeah, definitely. That, right. You don't just dive in, and like you say, expect to be good at it. It's something you should prepare for and develop a skill set in so that you can be good at it. And that you should go in with the especially as a guy, and maybe particularly this culture, go in with the intent of giving pleasure, not just receiving it.
Reciprocal experience.
Yeah, reciprocal.
Right? You know, one of the go ahead, Natasha.
No, you go. You finish.
Well, I was just going to offer some feedback on it, but
go ahead. No, go ahead.
One of the things, and this is definitely, I really, the more we talk about this first point, I'm really liking it, because I feel like so many other people listening, like this is such a common concern and a loving parent for their kiddo, right? The tough thing that, and we're going to get into a lot of this in some of the future bullet points, but sexuality, developing one's own sexual identity is messy, and it can be really complicated at times, even for those that are, you know, have never been with anyone outside of marriage. Like, you know, just developing one's own healthy attitude toward their self, their body, their partner, their partner's body, their own understanding of sexuality. It can be riddled with worries and what the heck was that, and I don't know what I'm doing, and I blah blah, all the stuff mixed in with holy moly, that was amazing, and I love this part of myself too, you know. And so it's one of the things that I get really disappointed by in the discourse out there, is that all the tough stuff or the discomfort gets scapegoated onto porn, or gets scapegoated onto, I mean, I've worked with some people who had like maybe a brief sexual encounter before they went to a bishop, but then got married, and then their sexual difficulties throughout their marriage, they always think it was because I did that thing before I got married. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, like when you know what, it's way more complicated than that. It's way more complicated. And so to put it onto that one thing that maybe was outside their value system really diminishes their own development and lessons learned and the things maybe they needed to learn and all that, you know. So anyway, that was just a thought I had on that.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so since I already outed myself on Mormon stories, as far as my own personal story, I'll just dive right in. So I had sex for the first time when I was 15 years old, which is amazing for me to think about right now as a 46-year-old woman. And for me, it was actually a very wonderful, fun part of my experience dating, and actually had a lot more negative experiences when I was older, just because of the different relationships I was in. So I think I really like the idea of this, that I think both Shannon and Kristen have touched on, that sexuality is messy. And I think that we have this idea that if we protect our children, and if they wait until the right moment, or with the right person, or do it in the right way, that they'll avoid a lot of the mishaps, or a lot of the pain, or a lot of the messiness that can come with sexual development. And so what we're trying to say is that some people may not have their first debut with sexuality until they're, in their early 20s. Some people may not have it until they're married. Some people may start quite early, like in their early teens. And some will have really negative experiences in all of those scenarios, and some will have positive experiences in all of those scenarios. And so we want to be careful to not just, first of all, downplay a teen's sexuality because they're young. We want to honor their sexuality because they don't feel young. They feel like their own person, and they feel like those feelings are very real and important to them. So I think you want to just make room for this idea that sexual development and sexual journeys will be unique and individual for each person. I think a lot of the values that you're espousing here, that it can be playful, that it can be fun, that it can be amazing. Those are really wonderful things. I think the fact that you're bringing up reciprocity, mutual pleasure, is also really important. But if that doesn't happen all at the first time, that's probably not because he's young or unprepared. That's because it's his first time. And it's also her first time. And so we want to hold them both kind of, I think, equally responsible for that. And I will actually touch on this as we go on your papers, that I felt like you held your son almost overly responsible because he's male. And I think that's important because we've had the opposite problem for millennia. And at the same time, we want to present, I think, feminist sexuality in a way where both men and women are responsible for things like consent, mutual pleasure, communication, etc. So, when you say to not be sexist, I agree with that, but let's also not put undue responsibility on him. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it needs to be equal.
Yeah. Any thoughts on what I've said or anything before we move on to the next point? Anybody?
What's a heartgasm?
A
How would you define
heartgasm.
heartgasm?
So a heartgasm is where your heart wants to explode with joy at the same time as having an orgasm. So it's a heartgasm. It's a combination.
Well, and that's a good question, because I think this is also where our values, I think that many of us, especially as parents, our values are about sex being meaningful, and that meaningful sex will be the best sex. And that might be true. That may be true for some people. And at the same time, lived experience does not always have that be the case for people, right? And so I think that we want to be careful and say to our kids, these are my values. This is how I think you'll have the best sex. But there are people who are having casual sexual encounters that would say they're having a great time. They feel like it's consensual. They feel like it's a stress relief, right? So
like who knew that it's just another sexual style? I always thought there's one right way. It's to have a heartgasm. But no, I learned recently that, I don't remember what I was listening to, but that in fact, that's my personal style of enjoyment, and that there are others that aren't about like even necessarily connection, that are other valid styles of sex. So okay, I'll take
it. Right. But I want to also point out that you have the right to that value. That's your value, that's your experience, that's your preference. And as a parent, you have the right to teach that value.
Okay, heartgasm is a preference.
It's an option on the buffet of options.
Got it.
That was
okay to say, as your parent, I hope this is the kind of sex that will be most meaningful for you, right? This is because that's my value. That's different than saying that's the only way that you can have good sex. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Okay.
My
all right. So bullet point.
You said your husband will what?
Oh, he'll appreciate that you've made that point very much.
All right. So bullet point number 2 says porn will likely make you very bad at sex, since sex is nothing like porn. When boys who watch a lot of it have real sex, they can't perform. It is causing sexual dysfunction in 18-year-old boys. You'll need a prescription for Viagra just to get it up. Which, again, I just love your style. You're just so like, to the point.
Mom.
Oh, I don't think I'm the typical mom, but
sassy.
That one I did not get from any reliable source, as I'm sure you're about to tell me. Okay. Bring it on, crucify me, what I do.
Actually, these are everything that you say in here, even though I would disagree with most of it as far as the research, is stuff that is said by organizations like Porn is the New Drug. A lot of sexual educating entities out there are touting these types of ideas and messages. So I would not blame any parent for believing these things.
A common misconception.
Yes.
I'm putting in my notes.
Yes.
Okay.
Kristen, Shannon, thoughts on this point?
I'm just thinking Marty Klein. I always use this with clients, but that we don't teach our kids to learn to drive by watching Fast and the Furious. So why would we teach our kids about sex by watching porn? However, I do think then that means we need to be doing a whole lot better job of actually educating them, because the abstinence-only based sex education means that most parents do not want to have this conversation with them. It's one conversation, and has been for years and years, generations even before that. It was no conversation. And so there has to be an alternate education piece to it. So I that's just me kind of agreeing with you in a sense on some of that. The part that, I think you have right. And then I'm trying to think of, and you might know better, Natasha, but, and Kristen, maybe you too, but Nicole Praz, that does all of the research, I think they've actually done studies and shown that people who watch porn actually, now correct me or edit me out if I get this wrong, but they've done studies, and people who watch porn actually have orgasm, right? Easier time getting to orgasm. Is that what it is? I can't remember.
Yeah, for a lot of, especially for women, it can be very helpful in reaching orgasm. Anytime you're dealing with anything erotic or arousing, whether it's pornography or fantasy or whatever you're using, it can be helpful in that regard. And yeah, I think the thing that is really not accurate at all is this myth that somehow watching porn is going to cause erectile dysfunction. And we're hearing that in a lot of different places. And I don't know if it was Marty Klein or somebody else, but they said if that was the case, as common as pornography is now, like our offices should be like packed full
Mm-hmm. Of erectile dysfunction.
with erectile dysfunction. And none of us have really seen an uptick in that, particularly in our practices.
Yeah, I think it was either Marty or David Lay.
Yes. Kristen, what are your thoughts?
When I read it, I just want to stick, the words just in front of it without any sort of media literacy or porn literacy or being able to understand when one is watching something for entertainment or fantasy value. The damage comes in when people don't understand what they're watching, right? Well, there can be damage on a few things, but one of the main concerns in this point, I think that you're highlighting is, without someone understanding that they're watching very male-centric, male pleasure-focused pornography, when that's one fraction of, and a large one, yes, but there's a lot of different types out there that are very, and some that are very centered on the female pleasure, and so it can make someone really, it can really influence someone to be quite poor, a poor sexual partner, right? It can influence someone to feel like they have to perform in a certain way in order to be a good sexual partner. Therefore, they get anxiety. Then that makes it hard to have an erection, right? And so, like, anxiety doesn't help out erectile functioning at all, And so there are a lot of things that can come from a misunderstanding or just misinformation about pornography in general, right? Natasha, would you?
Yeah, I think that, for example, the porn literacy piece is, I think, really important. If you know that pornography is a form of entertainment and that it's, it's actors and actresses, just like movies, there's things about when you go to the movie, there's some things that happen in a movie that happen in real life. So it's not all fake, but it's a movie with paid actors and actresses. And so when it comes to pornography, kids need to know that the orgasms are not how they normally happen. There's cuts in between. Erections don't last that long. Body image shots are shot differently with different lighting, just like they make people look better on camera for movies, right? So if you're going into a sexual experience thinking it's going to be a lot like what you watch at porn, probably not. at the same time, we all learn things from porn that we actually then do, so if the first time you see a kiss on the screen, maybe you haven't seen your parents kiss or somebody kiss in real life. You probably have seen that before you see it on a screen. But if you hadn't, you would still learn it from the screen. And I talk about, like cooking shows. We learn how to cook certain things through cooking shows, even though if you think that my kitchen looks like the cooking show, or that I've diced everything up right beforehand so I can just plop it in so easily like they do, that's where the false expectation is. But I still can learn something, or there might be a new spice that I haven't thought of using before, right? Or so it's kind of like this mixed bag that there's a lot of unrealistic expectations, and yet still things that you can learn by watching other people do sexual things together. And then the last piece that I'll say about erectile dysfunction, we do notice there are some accounts of young men in particular who will have the majority of their sexual development through masturbation. And obviously that's tied to pornography for many of them. So if all you're used to is your hand grip, and a certain amount of pressure and tension, then it can be a little bit anxiety producing to think that you're going to have the same type of experience with a vagina, right? That doesn't have the same grip or pressure that your hand does. And your hand knows very well by this time, usually if you're a man, how to go about it. This is actually true for women as well. Women who masturbate and learn how to pleasure themselves may only know how to have an orgasm in that particular way. And if they don't teach their partner or include that way of orgasming it through the sexual play with their partner, then they may have a hard time having an orgasm in other ways. So this doesn't mean that you're broken or that somehow your penis will stop working if you watch porn or anything like that. It just means that you've accustomed yourself to a certain type of pleasuring, and you may have to diversify or learn how to diversify once you're with a partner. So I hope that makes sense. And anything else about this point before we move on? Okay. Bullet point number 3 is it teaches one-sided sex where it's all about the men. So what do we have to say about that?
I kind of think Kristen already touched on it with, that there's male-centric, adult films, and there's also a lot out there that's geared towards females, towards same-sex partners. There's a lot of different stuff out there. But I do think it goes a little bit along with the rest of our kind of patriarchal society. And I guess that's where probably the feminist in me comes out, that it is mostly what men are viewing, right? And they probably, I would say, the easiest stuff to find. You'd have to look maybe a little bit harder for the other things. I think that's all.
Kristen, anything you would add from what you said before?
Nope.
Okay. Yeah, so there's definitely a lot of, Camille, go ahead.
Oh, I took feminism. I think it was called Women. Oh, what was that class called? We just cut it and called it feminism, but a legal theory class focusing on female issues last semester at BYU Law. And, there's a whole chapter in that book about, it's entitled Non-Subordination. And the textbook author really did focus on more this negative aspect of pornography, this more male-centric. And, she opens the chapter by saying the sexual realm is where dominance theory has the most to offer. And it's sort of what, where we get sexual harassment and violence against women and control of women's sexuality. So the male-centric part of porn is a feminist's nightmare. It's just not, and feminism being defined as someone who thinks that men and women are equal. I think sometimes I just read an article that like feminism is Utah's F word, which is just ridiculous. But anyway, that there is a bad version of pornography as far as its dominance of women and its control of women's sexuality. I mean, that's depicting that. But I'm hearing you say, no, there's actually bad, and then there's, I don't know, maybe there's good pornography that can help you teach you, help you diversify your sex life, that can that portrays men and women really enjoying, and that could add spice to your sex life. So did I listen? Did I get the message?
You did.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'd like to even get a little bit more specific about what we're talking about. I think probably the most male-centric thing you'll see in pornography is that it ends when the man ejaculates. So the experience ends with the male ejaculation. Probably another very male-centric thing is that we do see a lot of oral sex on males. And we also see a lot of although it's interesting, we objectify the male more because really all you see about the male is the penis. But you see the woman's body, you see her reacting to the penis, right? And so it's kind of interesting that we only see the penis instead of the male's pleasure, right? Or the male being able, but so it's this weird kind of
objectification.
Yeah, because in some ways, I think a lot of times the issue that we have with females in porn is that they're in porn at all, that we see them as being used or being paid for something that is of virtue or of wonder or anything like that. But if you think about most kind of like run-of-the-mill porn, it's a woman's body and it's her face going, oh, yeah, yes. And so her pleasure is there. It may be fake, but it's there. You don't hear the man often as much. Again, I'm just talking about kind of run-of-the-mill. There's all kinds of pornography out there. But what, a teenager might come across most typically is something where the female, you can see what she's up to. You can really only see the male penis, and then it all ends with his ejaculation. So I think there's some things there that we can talk about. Well, what is male-centric? Is it the fact that they're having sex at all and that she's a woman in the sex industry? That's not necessarily male-centric, right? I think the male-centric is where it's focused on his pleasure. Her pleasure doesn't seem to count very much, where it's focused on objectifying her experience with her full body versus not his body. So in other words, it's a male gaze, right? What does the male gaze want to look at?
Mm-hmm.
He wants to look at the woman having the pleasure. Well, what about the male? We want to look at the male. What about his pleasure?
Right.
We want to look at him too. So I don't know, Kristen and Shannon, if you have any more like specific examples of what we mean by feminist porn versus male-centric porn, because we have a lot of feminist producers now that are creating a wider variety of erotic, sexually explicit materials out there.
Jana, did you want to say?
I was just going to touch on a little bit of what you were saying, Natasha, that I think one of the things that oftentimes you don't see is a lot of clitoral stimulation in some of that porn. And so, and we know that at least the majority, 70% of women, that's how they have an orgasm. So that piece I think is missing, which is maybe unhelpful to learning kind of how to please a woman. And
like the thrusting, right? The anal thrusting.
And
or
so
the
I wonder if that's
thrusting.
where some of it comes from, because it doesn't mean that they're still not enjoying it, or it doesn't feel good, but they just may not be having an orgasm because they're not having the clitoral stimulation. And then I think the other key point to remember is where I think kids oftentimes don't understand or don't know, is that not everybody wants to do everything they're seeing in porn, and they're doing a lot. And
For
you don't
sure.
see, I think you touched on this already, Natasha, but and you can find any kind of porn out there, right? That for any kind of fantasy or fetish, really. But I think that goes back to kind of teaching a little better too about consent, but also that's what you're talking about. You're not seeing the behind the scenes. I mean, anal sex is like gotten so popular among young teens and kids because they think of it as not really sex, but it can be extremely painful if not done correctly. And you don't see the hour or, two maybe of the anal plug and different things and lube and warming up that they have before they go into those experiences. So it just made me think of that as you were talking about that.
Yes. Camille, did you have a question?
Yeah. This I'm looking at my casebook from this Women in the Law class that I spoke of a minute ago. So this premier feminist is perpetuating, I think, ideas that you would say are it's perpetuating misinformation. But I would love for you to address some of these statements. She says, pornography has a central role in actualizing a system of subordination in the contemporary West, beginning with the conditions of its production. Women in pornography are bound, battered, tortured, harassed, raped, and sometimes killed, or in the glossy men's entertainment magazines, merely humiliated, molested, objectified, and used. In all pornography, I know you're not going to like this one, women are prostituted. It is done because someone who has more power than they do, someone who matters, someone with rights, a full human being and a full citizen gets pleasure from seeing it or doing it or seeing it as a form of doing it. In order to produce what the consumer wants to see, it must first be done to someone, usually a woman with few real choices.
Anybody want to hit on any of that? I saw Kristen's eyes get wide.
I mean, that's really articulate way of, the main concerns out there, the heavy hitters with pornography now, today, contemporarily still. I have so many things coming up for me from that. That there is harmful pornography out there. There's destructive and dangerous, where people are not making their own choice. The sex workers are not, and those in the films are not making their own decisions. Those are heavily problematic for anybody. There are very dangerous things portrayed and so without understanding how either the film was made and if they were consensual actors and all that. I mean, that we can unpack a whole lot of really problematic things as the person you just read was saying. The thing is, that's one faction of an enormous industry.
Is it the minority?
Natasha, do you know the?
Well, I do know that for example, what's considered violent porn by the sex field is the minority. But this gets into the, what is considered violent. So is a man, coming in the face of a woman violent? Is, a woman who likes to be spanked violent, or if they're doing some type of play where she is bound or, gagged right by a, what's it called?
Ball gag. Ball gag.
Yeah. So anything like that, or tied up in ropes or things. But this is where people do this in the privacy of their own homes. They do these kinds of things in dungeons. They do these kinds of things in all kinds of settings consensually, with the persons involved finding those types of dominant or submissive role playing. And both men and women play dominant and submissive roles in these. Very exciting and arousing. Now we can get into the psychology of that, which is, dominance and power has been a long time history within sexuality. But when people are doing it consensually, or when they are working, they're sex working and getting paid for the work that they do in a consensual way, well, that now becomes a matter of agency, right? And whether or not we ourselves decide what that's moral or part of our value system or part of our erotic templates, well, those are our own opinions, but they have opinions about this too. And I've heard them talk about their opinions. One of the things that's very interesting that we're finding is the biggest porn growth that we're seeing right now is amateur porn. So people really have a lot of fun videotaping themselves and putting it on the internet. Because for forever we've had these themes in human sexuality of voyeurism and exhibitionism and showing yourself off and feeling empowered and feeling like you want to peek in. The peeking or the showing are the human sexual themes that have been around a lot longer than the video camera, right? And so we now see technology being used in ways that humans have always had certain erotic preferences. So I think is a woman Are there potentials for women to be objectified or taken advantage in the business world? Hell yes. Everywhere in the business world. We're not paying women correctly. We're not giving women the same rights as men. But why pick the porn industry to have it be the one area where they're making these types of industry kinds of issues? So yes, we need to work on women's rights and women's voices and women's ability to show up. But to the point of, many people who talk about this, when a pornography company says, hey, we are going to do this particular show, the line for women and men who want to be in that show is huge. Nobody's forcing people really in this country. There are times when it's forced, but not usually, because people are lining up and wanting to be in these types of shows. Now, why people line up for those types of shows? Those, a lot of times that's the way that you become popular as an actor, right? Or that's the way that in the industry. So are there issues with that? Potentially, yes. But they're not necessarily just pornography's fault. It's kind of like our entire society's fault. It's no different than the models that are going out for L'Oreal advertisements, or for why are women lining up for those types of positions? Well, because we as a culture have decided that that type of job carries a lot of self-worth. We're going to give you a lot of acclamation because of those types of jobs. So it's a little bit more complex than just pornography is what I want to say. Anything anybody would add about that?
No, I think you got it.
All right. The next one I think is similar. It says inequality is pornography's central theme. Men are depicted as violent aggressors and women are objectified. So I think, treated like objects that can be battered, tortured, and humiliated. You can try that tactic with women, but good luck. This is to her son. So yeah, and good luck with that. And it's good that you're, I think, pointing these things out, and especially in the realm of BDSM, which I do think we should educate our children about, is really, again, talking about that consent piece. The consent and mutual pleasure are the ingredients for any experience to go well, whether it's playing something out that maybe can feel a little bit off balance as far as who's dominating. But if it's consensual and it's pleasurable, then great. What you really want to talk about is somebody going along with the ride in ways that are not necessarily healthy. But that can be true of just run-of-the-mill vanilla sex. That can be true of run-of-the-mill feeling up somebody's breasts, So it doesn't have to be super explicit for it to, are we talking to our kids about, are you just going forward with something because you're really excited without really checking in with your partner? Is it enough that your partner's just kind of lying there, not saying no, but not really saying yes either, right? So these are the kinds of conversations that's very different than somebody who's like, ooh, I totally want to try handcuffs and tie me up and we're going to have some fun. That's very different. And yet, exploitation can happen in very vanilla ways just because we haven't really talked enough about consent.
That's an issue that arises a lot in the cases that we read in law school about the sexual cases where, there are criminal cases. And of course it hinges on consent, and, they're moving from no means no to a yes means yes, and trying to create that as the better, higher standard. So we talk about that a lot at home. My son has heard that a lot. Yes means yes, Alex,
That's right.
So,
well, and I think just adding to that, just even so, if you're kissing or making out with somebody, that doesn't mean you want to go any farther. And that's the kind of thing I think, you need to educate on. And maybe because you did something on a Tuesday doesn't mean you're going to want to do it again on a Thursday. So it's an ongoing conversation with your partner or with any partner around consent and, what's okay. That's where I think a big part of that yes means yes comes in.
And if your partner just said yes because you said that otherwise you'd break up with her or him. What kind of yes is that?
Not consent.
Coercion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting, it's just kind of occurring to me, you're elbow deep into one of the hardest, like being in law, like studying for your law degree and kind of dissecting these like sexual assault cases, I'm assuming.
Right.
We don't love the lens of the legal system when it comes to this stuff because it is so oversimplified, right? It's still so important for the system to exist. It needs to. But it is really like an actual sexual encounter. Like there's, like Shannon was just saying, there's ongoing checking in, enthusiasm conveyed, like, is this cool for you? You know, not just, do you want to do this? Okay, I asked that one time, so now I have an all day pass. You know what I mean?
Well,
Go ahead.
and they take the, it's escaping me right now, the totality of circumstances typically, and so in these cases that we read, these sexual assault cases, they are dissecting it blow by blow by blow. And I want my son to know that, like, you know, you can end up, whether or not you're in jail depends on whether you had consent each step of the way. And it just seems like, I don't know if any of us know how to educate our kids about what that actually means. Like, does it mean, okay, now I'm going to touch your breast. Is that okay with you? I mean, is that a conversation I should be? I mean, I don't know. For Mormon women, their eyes are cross-eater right now, hearing me even talk that way. But coach me. Coach me. Oh, counselors, my counselors.
I mean, it's a skill set too. Like we're talking like being able to communicate and know yourself, a partner, know how to communicate where you're at, what you'd like to do, how your partner's doing. I mean, that is a skill set just like all the other things we learn in life. And so you're an amazing mother and wanting to get his brain thinking about these things, but a lot of this is going to be experience, even if he isn't engaging in partner encounters until he's married. Like that's still needed even in marriage,
right?
Especially in marriage too.
Especially in marriage.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons why abstinence-only education is actually more dangerous in the consent field, because kids who are not prepared to know how to talk about whether or not I can touch your breasts may just feel like they get caught in the moment, and therefore the moment decides what's going to happen.
Right.
Versus having,
or they're somehow less complicit, I guess. I don't know what they're less guilty because they didn't voice it. You know, I can see them thinking that way. So
or even the many women I've heard, like, well, it already went this far and I'm already dirty. So
absolutely.
Just go the whole way. So again, when we posit these types of conversations through, individual worth, which I think is very harmful for kids, it's like no sexual act will have anything to do with your worth, and that way you have more ability to decide what sexual acts you want to or not engage in, regardless of what you've done in the past, because that's part of your journey. I think that's a better.
I also think this is where I absolutely love Al Vernacchio's book, For Goodness Sex, because he talks a lot about values and helping kids kind of identify what their own values are. Because oftentimes as parents, and of course we do this in the beginning, we're instilling our own values into our children. But at some point we kind of go, okay, why am I not doing that? Well, I don't know, because mom and dad told me not to. Whereas if you kind of know where you stand, which goes back to, again, having a lot of education, but if you've had these conversations and you know where you stand and you have an idea of kind of why or why not you're doing something, then you're gonna go into it a lot better and be able to kind of defend maybe why you're not, because you've got your own values. It's not just because mom or dad told me not to. And his book's amazing anyway.
Yeah.
All around for everything.
All right. Bullet point number 5, pornography promotes sexual callousness, increasing your proclivity to rape. So that one is a definite hard no. In other words, people do not become rapers or pedophiles or violent because they watch pornography, even violent pornography. The only people that tend to maybe have a little bit of a tiny possible correlation, and that's even pushing it, are people who are already kind of have a predisposition for violence. So this one might be people with a certain personality disorder or lack of empathy. So, young people who already have issues like that may watch something violent, whether it's porn or something else, and then act in violent ways. But actually what we see all over society is the more we watch violence, the less violent we are. Isn't that weird? We live in the least violent times, even though I know that's hard to believe because, of all the news and scary things we hear about, and there are awful things that happen, but your chances of dying by homicide are like infinitesimally smaller these days than even like 100 years ago.
That is a surprise to hear. I would say that even like really highly respected periodicals, like the Atlantic Monthly is sort of the good word here in my home. Like, my husband reads every word. I try to scan it, but I think I've seen, there's an article I just pulled up from the Atlantic Monthly that perpetuates some of these ideas. Is porn culture to be feared? Subtitle: Social conservatives and some feminists worry that the rise of streaming high-def pornography causes men to use and abuse women, but it has coincided with steep declines in rape and spousal abuse. Okay, there you go. So
yeah, the research actually shows that men who watch porn, believe this or not, and I don't even know how to correlate it, have more egalitarian views of women than men who don't.
Well, some of them do. Like it's a lot higher than we ever would think, for sure, right? Like some definitely develop, a lot of really dangerous thoughts about women, but it's usually, like Natasha was saying, not necessarily because of the porn. There's a predisposition ahead of time.
To be a sociopath.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And it's just kind of fueling to the fire for those that it does affect like that.
Wow. I have so many misconceptions.
And even for those people, I mean, these studies come out of, I think, the Netherlands, where people who are violent or who would be rapists, sometimes having the pornography to watch keeps them from having to act out their compulsions. So it's really difficult from a moral standpoint and an ethical standpoint. These are very complex issues.
I mean, should I even be warning my son against pornography then?
So I wanted to, it's funny you just said that, because I was going to say something that in response to just what you just said. These discussions are so, like Natasha was saying, so complex, and they're difficult to have, because it feels like, I will speak for me, it feels, even though this is not what I'm saying, it feels as though I'm saying, stop worrying about it. It's no big deal. Everyone should just go watch porn because we'll all be better off for it. And that's not at all what we're saying. It's one of the things, one of the most consistent themes that we'll talk about is it's just more complex than that. We're in a society that has oversimplified sexuality to disgusting levels and really, really harmful levels. And we're all still recovering from it. And so there are some that pornography, they will see it as being one of the worst things that's happened to themselves or their marriage. There are others that think it's the best thing that's ever happened to them in their marriage. There are others that just like, it's whatever, it's fine, I enjoy it sometimes, but I don't care. And there's really unethical pornography out there, and then there's super ethical pornography out there. It's just so much more complex than what the overall media talks about on both sides, because it is a very dichotomous topic out there. It's so much more complicated than even, and everyone, it's way more complicated than what we've been dealt our whole lives and the centuries before.
Got it.
I'm noticing that we're about halfway through this document, and we're past the hour mark that we said we would do. And I know that we've got people on schedule. So is it okay if I just make an executive decision for us to pick this up next time and do more of this? helpful to you, Camille, to have us kind of walk through all these different bullet points?
Of course.
You've had some
Absolutely.
great questions along the way.
Absolutely helpful. Yeah, I just really appreciate the counsel.
Okay. Kristen,
Can I
yes.
say something really quick? I just want to say thank you, because my style in doing some of these things, I'm always thinking of who's listening, who the heck is out there listening. And I can only imagine there are so many who are resonating with you, because I've thought these things before. I don't want to speak for everyone, but I kind of will. Like, this is all very familiar. These are very familiar concerns that we've grappled with, that we've really, I mean, my goodness, we ended up getting like advanced certifications in it because they are so concerning to,
To me, it comes down to empirical evidence. I mean, if you have evidence that's been statistically and empirically studied that shows that it reduces, spousal abuse, or it reduces, rape. I mean, that speaks. It's not just another opinion. There's science behind it. And hopefully your listeners will feel the same. And there are a lot of people in this community that doubt science, so you're not going to reach those people. But
well, we don't doubt science that correlates with our belief systems.
Right.
And this is why I think, as a marriage and family therapist, for example, so much of the research around family therapy resonated with me as a Mormon woman, and as a wife and as a mother. And I would have held all of these ideas as a marriage and family therapist. All of these ideas I would have been on board with. And so it really was only until my sex therapy training really forced me to challenge my own biases, information I did not want. I did not like it when people told me that men had more egalitarian perceptions of women. I was like, what? That makes me angry.
Yeah.
That cannot be.
Yeah, right. It does. It does. It will challenge your listeners too.
Yeah, it is hard. And that's why we understand. That's why we continue to have these conversations over and over again. I mean, Kristen and Shannon and myself and others like Kristen Hodson, and there's several other therapists up and coming, that we've invited on the show as well that are becoming sex therapists. It's so important to continue to have these conversations, because we have heard these types of messages that you've written here for your son multitudes of time from multitudes of sources, and even sources that feel very credible, reliable.
I just do have to give myself credit that I sent this to you within 5 minutes of having written it, and the only people who have seen it are you and then my classmates, and they were begging me to email it to them after class because they wanted to spread it out, and I have refused. I'm like, it contains misinformation. I'm not going to perpetuate more bad information, so you have to wait till I have this podcast. And that was in, I don't know, November. So I was in like a bathroom stall and I was calling over to Courtney. I was like, Courtney, I'm going to be able to finally send you that document because I have a podcast tonight. So to correct all this misinformation.
Well, on the flip side, Natasha, I think we also need to, and I don't know, I hate always speaking for you guys, but I always do. I think it's important that we also recognize we're not saying, the three of us are not saying that young teenagers and kids should be like viewing porn.
That's right.
So, because I know a lot of people like to kind of hang on to that piece when we talk about
it's the same
porn.
It's like Esther Perel, that she gets accused of being pro-affair.
Oh yeah, and non-monogamous.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great comparison.
Yeah, that is a really good comparison.
I'm going to use that. Yes.
The number one thing that we say about pornography is that it is adult material.
Yes.
It is made for adults.
Yes.
Although I'm sure industries like the cigarette industry or any industry, makeup industries, they definitely target young people because they're the up and coming, consumers. And so we're not trying to, by any means, let them off the hook for that. At the same time, we are not saying, oh yes, hand over pornography to your children so that they can learn these great ways to become sexual. In fact, we would recommend Marty Klein's pornography literacy checklist so that you're having a really good bullet pointed ideas of why we're concerned. Now, it's also probably mixed in with the reality that we're not going to be able to control whether our kids watch it.
Right.
So we want to assume that they're maybe going to watch it sometimes or a lot of times. Or
I mean, this particular stake is so focused on the porn consumption. And, you know, the Saturday conference, I think a year ago, they put statistics up and it was like 98% of 15-year-olds at this stake have viewed porn. And, you know, I think my husband leaned over and said, and the other 2% are lying, you know, so it's at least acknowledged even by local leadership that it's a hot commodity.
Yeah. So I'm not saying let your kids watch porn or encourage porn use. At the same time, I don't know that it's super helpful to try to get them to stop. And therefore, if we can educate them or at least give them good reasons as to why we might be concerned or how they can understand some of the things that they might be seeing, then we're giving them a better launch.
And I look forward to the continuation of this, because at this point, I don't really know what to tell him. I don't know even what to caution him about. I mean, so far, it's like green light, boy. Sure. And I hear what you're saying. You're saying we're not being pro-pornography, especially for, you know, people with underdeveloped sexuality or young brains. But I can't even tell you at this point, you know, when you say we don't suggest it for teens, I can't even tell you why at this point. So we need to continue.
Yes, we will continue.
Good point.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for being with us tonight. We will pick up where we left off. And for all of you who are listening, we hope you've enjoyed tonight's episode. We hope that we're hopefully opening your minds to new ideas. Again, please consider a donation if you find anything of value here at mormonmentalhealth.org. We'll see you next time. Talk about more sexy stuff.
Okay.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
We took the long road home, turned minutes into miles, and as the evening traveled on, the sunset bathed your smile. We stopped beneath the desert stars, wrapped in each other's arms. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth.
A trail with tears, pain and sorrow too.
But through every storm we traveled on, like lovers do. And if sometimes we fell apart, we always came back home. Was as simple as I love you, an ordinary, extraordinary truth. Some people say love is blind and forever is too long. But I see your eyes in every sunrise, Let's take a long road on together until we're gone. Want you by my side till the day I die and into the beyond. It's as simple as our love is. That's how I wanna go. All wrapped up in the arms of our extraordinary. It's nothing ordinary love. Ordinary. No, it's extraordinary.